All right, this is Openstax U.S. History, Chapter 6, Section 4, Identity During the American Revolution. So recall 6.3, the Battle of Yorktown was the last battle of the Revolution, and this led to American independence. So now we have a brand new country created in the form of the United States of America. But the American Revolution had a different impact on different groups of people. And so this section talks a little bit about those different groups. First of all, the Loyalists. Recall the Loyalists were the ones who were loyal to Great Britain. They find themselves on the losing side. In fact, during the course of the war, colonial or now state governments passed confiscation acts, which allowed property to be confiscated. This could also be things like land from those who were loyal to the British Army. So some of those people eventually lost what they had. This led to many refugees. In fact, 100,000 loyalists left for places like Canada and other places after the revolution was over because they feared that there might be some sort of retribution against them, despite the promise that was made in the Treaty of Paris. This image right here is depicting loyalists, those who were still loyal to Great Britain, leaving the United States after their side had essentially lost. For slaves and Indians, the outcome of the American Revolution was, for the most part, on average, you might say negative, although mixed. For slaves, especially in the southern colonies, slavery was reinforced. This was especially true in the South. However, it is also true that northern colonies began to move towards a gradual emancipation. And here we have really the roots of the Civil War kind of beginning to settle themselves in, whereas in the South, it is reinforced. Slavery actually increases. The number of slaves increase in the southern colonies. The North begins to move more towards a gradual emancipation. Sometimes we call the American Revolution the first emancipation because during the course of the war, many slaves had in fact escaped. And so hundreds of thousands of slaves got their freedom either by fleeing to the British side, being able to escape during the chaos, or a combination of any of those other circumstances. But the institution itself became more reinforced, especially during or in the South. For Native Americans, those that were allied with the United States obviously benefited. Those who were allied with the British did not. Joseph Brant, he was a Native American man. I believe he was a Mohawk. He had allied himself with the British. These are images or depictions of Joseph Brant here. And for those Native Americans who allied themselves with the British, they were now more or less at the mercy of American or colonial governments. After Yorktown, there were still a number of battles that took place between the Continental Army and Native Americans on essentially what was viewed as the Western frontier. For groups that we've talked about in this class, like the Iroquois, without the British really there to keep the colonists at bay, and after handing over that territory, remember the British ceded a lot of land, and that land really was lived on and occupied and belonged to a lot of Native American tribes. They were now at the mercy of the American or colonial government. And so some tribes or some groups like the Six Nations or the Iroquois Confederacy opted instead to go to Canada, where they hoped they would get better protection from that government there. For Patriots, those that supported the independence movement, certainly it was a victory, but not without a cost. In addition to those who were killed in battle, there were plenty of material shortages. That is things like food, people who had endured starvation during the Revolutionary War itself. The continental currency, which was the way that soldiers were paid, it was highly inflated at the end of the Revolutionary War, that in order to finance it, the colonial government printed continental dollars, and by doing that, really caused the currency to crash. And so this led to, just more hardship for those who had, really endured but supported the colonial cause. For women, even though women did not fight for the most part on front lines, this led to an increase in responsibility. This was both in terms of home life and work life. So, for example, before the war, you had, maybe the business was run by the male head of household, but when the war started, that man went off to fight for war, and that was up to women really to run these businesses and have this increased burden of having really to do it all at home. Groups like the Daughters of Liberty, we've come across them before, going on movements like the homespun movement, leading things like boycotts. But even when it came to some of the battles and the action during the American Revolution, you did have women who were called camp followers, and they provided things like, food, shelter, and other things. They would follow the Continental Army around and provide, real sort of material benefits for them. So in various other ways outside of simply just fighting on the front lines, the American Revolutionary War was felt by really all aspects of colonial society.